Hello there, welcome to another episode of Q&A about business, innovation, and managing life. And looks like we have all sorts of questions here, and let's see what I can do with them. So a question from Erin here. What's your rule of thumb for launching a product for yourself and for others? A minimum viable product, quantum of utility, other. When is a product ready enough that you should launch it? Well, one of the issues is it depends a little bit on what the market for the product is. There are products where it's going to a market where people will try it as a kind of tourist thing, and if it doesn't work when they try it, they'll just never try it again. And there are products which are in more of a business-to-business, complicated software engineering, server level thing, where everybody knows it's going to be a complicated ramp to implement that product. And I think the standards for when a product is ready to launch are a bit different for those cases. Like if it's a more of a, people will poke at it as tourists and it better work and do the right thing, it has to be polished enough that they won't have a bad experience. If it's a kind of a long ramp server product, it's kind of like, well, there might be some consulting involved. We're going to have to work with you. Your configuration is going to be different. It doesn't need to be as polished. And one can waste a lot of time trying to polish it, only to realize that the customers for that complicated server product, they set up their domains differently, and it all has to be changed. And one's going to have an interaction with them anyway. I think the most important thing in terms of product conceptualization, particularly, is know what you're signing up for and deliver what you're signing up for. So, for example, let's say you have a product. Well, this was a big thing with Wolfram Alpha, for example, was what was Wolfram Alpha? What was it supposed to be? And would it deliver on reasonable things that people tried to get it to do? And when we had early versions of Wolfram Alpha, before it was ready to release, it just failed on those criteria. So if you tell people it's a question answering system and it will answer sort of reasonable factual questions for you, and then of the 3 questions you might type in, 2 of them failed, that's just not good enough. People are going to just say, forget it, I'm not interested in this. So for Wolfram Alpha, we kind of advanced it to the point where based on what we predicted people would type in, it would work a large fraction, 80–90% of the time, whatever, and it would not be and that was sufficient to launch it. Had we tried to launch it earlier, people would have just had a bad experience because 2 out of 3 things they typed in just wouldn't work, and they'd go away unhappy and confused about what the thing was supposed to be. So, but in that particular case, that was a very difficult what we're signing up to do type situation. Another case that I have to say we didn't do very well was our early cloud products. Is now 10 years ago or more. We have very beautiful notebooks we invented this idea of notebooks back in 1987, we have very beautiful notebook technology on desktops, and we've had that for 35 years. And it's been gradually getting ever better and better, but we've had a very good experience on desktops for 35 years. We had this idea, okay, we're going to have a cloud version of this. Okay, the original kind of sort of thing was, okay, we're just going to re-implement the whole notebook technology stack in web browsers in the cloud. Okay, that was the wrong thing to sign up for because it was really hard to do. And it took close to a decade to get to the point where that was respectable. Maybe not quite a decade, maybe at least 5 years to get to that point. We shouldn't have signed up for that. We should have signed up for something much more modest, which we could have delivered very well. And I think that's an important feature in defining products, is kind of sign up for what you can actually deliver, and then do a good job of delivering it, and make sure that the pieces of the workflows that people will actually follow are well polished. And so I think that's my sort of criterion, is you can't really release a product until the thing you've signed up for, the thing you say your product is being delivered well enough that people have a good experience, at least if you expect it to be a consumer product. If you expect it to be a product that is sold in consultation with services and things like this, it's a different story, because there's no way you're going to get it perfectly polished, because everyone's going to have a different configuration. It's never going to be perfectly polished. One of the things that I've been pushing on for our server products, for example, is, well, many of our sophisticated server products come with a certain amount of services, because we know that there's no way that you're going to plop it into your infrastructure without some kind of customization and so on, because that's just not the way corporate data centers and so on work. There's and even beyond that, to expect some kind of preventative maintenance that has to get done every few months, because just, server configuration, server systems are complicated. And if you give the idea it's a kind of a fire and forget product, people are going to be unhappy. It's just like, if you have a car and it's fire and forget and you never take it in for service, you're eventually going to be unhappy because things are going to start failing. And so, it's the same thing with a complex server product, very different from a consumer product where you expect it to be the case. You just deliver it and it's just going to keep working. Actually, of course, the footnote to that is it keeps working until the operating system vendors change things out from under you and you have to make changes. But that's a different, separate story. But so, I think, as I say, when it comes to defining a product, sometimes you have the following situation. You imagine something. You say, it's going to be really important to build this thing. You build it. Sometimes you put a lot of work into building the thing that you think is the really important thing to build. Then once you've more or less built it, you realize, gosh, there's this feature of this thing we built that actually doesn't require all the complexity that we built into it, but is the real path that is super valuable to people. And you kind of have to sort of pivot the description of the product, even though maybe you even needed to build all that sophisticated stuff to support the thing which ends up being the really good path, so to speak. That's kind of the thing that's the thing that I find quite often happens. And one of the things I've noticed is that if you say, my usual practice is, when we first imagine a product, I want to imagine what would the marketing page about this product say. What basically is the what basically is the description of the product. What are we building towards? But then, when one's sort of in the middle of building it, there's a certain tendency to say, let's write all the marketing pages and so on and so on and so on as we build it. I found that to be a mistake. I found it to be better to wait until the thing is fairly finished and polished and then see what you really have, and then describe it from that. In fact, some things that happens to me, for example, I discovered recently we have a product called Wolfram Alpha Notebook Edition, which is the step beyond Wolfram Alpha, where you're just typing a single input and getting a bunch of results. Wolfram Alpha Notebook Edition creates a notebook and allows you to use natural language input and have a succession of computations where it's a no-code access to computational power. Well, we built this. We built the desktop version. We then built the cloud version. It's been gradually getting better and better. And I suddenly realized recently, boy, this is a really good product, and it really has a very important niche. We had imagined it would be something that would be a product sold primarily for specific classes at different places and so on. But we realized that it's actually a great product that is just a continual sort of upward path from people who just use Wolfram Alpha in kind of one-shot type fashion. It's the thing that goes beyond the one-shot use of Wolfram Alpha. It allows you to sort of build up a computation, build up a notebook, share that notebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized there's a great message and a great path for this product, which is only clear now that the product has reached a certain level of quality and polish. And what I had imagined about it before was much more modest than what I now imagine for that product. So that's the thing where you kind of need to see the product to know what the significance of the product is. I have to say the same type of thing comes up in even doing science and things like this, is you're building in a certain direction. You think the hard lifting, the heavy lifting part of it is this whole thing that I'm building. And then you realize at the end, there's the really important thing that's this. I'll give you an example from long ago, from science that I did, something that I kind of only realized as a sort of piece of personal history in the last few months. But back in the 1980s, I was working on kind of simple programs, and like cellular automata and so on, and trying to figure out if you just sort of pick a program at random, what will it typically do? And the big and surprising thing that I found is that sort of even incredibly simple programs sort of picked, say, at random, can often do very complicated things. That's a big deal. It's kind of explains things about how sort of complexity arises in nature, builds into lots of different kinds of important pieces of science. But one of the things that happened was there was a question of, okay, you've got these simple programs, let's analyze what they do. And so I did a certain amount of that, and I had some friends who were very top mathematicians who were interested in doing that same kind of thing. And so they tried picking away at trying to analyze these very simple programs. And they're like, these are very simple programs. We must be able to analyze them in some way. They failed. They didn't manage to get very far. Eventually, they just said, we give up. You know, this isn't, the methods we have don't allow us to make progress. We don't think, you know, that just doesn't seem interesting. What I realized, and I only sort of realized that I'd realized this long after the time, the most important thing I realized was the very fact that it was really hard to do this analysis was itself an incredibly important thing. And that's the thing that I call computational irreducibility. And that's the thing that's had sort of tentacles that have reached out into our physics project and metamathematics and kind of a very broad understanding of kind of the way the world is put together. And that's something that came out of something where you might have said, well, that's sort of a footnote. Oh, we can't analyze this. Let's not write about that. We can't analyze it. But it turned out that sort of little footnote was the thing which was, in a sense, the main event. And I found the same kind of thing sometimes with products, that the thing you thought was just sort of the easy footnote is actually the thing that is the most significant of all. You know, it's worth saying that even with computers, the original concept of computers and the idea of universal computation that arose in the 1920s, 1930s, and so on, people imagined that it was all about sort of theoretically proving this and that and the other. And then people imagined that computers were about, you know, computing mathematical kinds of things. Well, you know, people like me have done a lot with computers, computing mathematical kinds of things, but the vast majority of what computers are used for is things that really have nothing to do with the sort of mathematical computation side of them. It has to do with things like storing stuff and being able to easily modify what you've stored and things like this, which in a sense was a footnote to the original concept of computers, but then ended up being sort of the very important thing that drove things like personal computers and so on. Let's see. Juan asks, how do you deal with boring aspects of developing a product, e.g. marketing, when you didn't have people to delegate that to? You know, what's boring for one person is thoroughly exciting to somebody else, and vice versa. You know, there are people, friends of mine, who are CEOs of companies where there's a lot of technology that those companies do, and those CEOs are not really technical. That wasn't their lineage and their interest and so on. And I sometimes think that's a terribly difficult situation to be in, to manage a company that is full of technology and to not really be able to dive in and understand that technology, or really to care about it. That you know, the significance is kind of the implication of the technology, not the plumbing inside the technology. And so, you know, I think the statement, what for one, the thing that's interesting for one person isn't the thing that's necessarily interesting for somebody else. You know, I think you mentioned marketing as being a boring area. You know, I think marketing is kind of, at some level, is what's the point of what you're doing? And, you know, at some level, if you're interested in doing it and you have kind of a vision and a strategy, that really is the core of what marketing is about. Now, there's a lot of detail of marketing, and, you know, these days, a lot of, you know, detailed stuff about, you know, funnels and you know, web analytics and this and that and the other. There's a lot of kind of in the trenches stuff to be done, but there's also a bigger picture of what are you trying to do to with some product. You know, I think the general question of how do you deal with a project where there is a part that you're really excited about, and there are other parts that have to get done that you're not so excited about, but all the parts need to happen in order for the project to come to fruition. You know, my basic answer to that is you got to roll up your sleeves and do the parts that you might not have thought were the most exciting parts. One of the things that I would say is a silver lining to that cloud, for me at least, is that sometimes the parts where I'm like groaning, why do I have to do this part? This part is really kind of boring. I realize as I get into it and I do it with seriousness, so to speak, actually there's something important and interesting and maybe novel that I can do with that part that maybe other people haven't done that really makes that part really, really sing in some great way. I mean, to give you an example of the life of exciting, boring, whatever. Okay, so, you know, I put out a certain number of books. I have a book coming out soon about metamathematics. So a couple of weeks ago, book is almost finished. And one of the things that has to be done for the book is make its index. Well, writing an index to a book, particularly a book about metamathematics, is not so easy because it's a book with a lot of complicated conceptual ideas, a lot of different names that have been given to things in history and so on. And, you know, to write a good index, and by the way, you might say, who needs an index when you can do search on the web? You know, what I find, for example, with my New Kind of Science book and other books I've done, which are on the web, they're just freely available on the web, is that the index is unbelievably much more useful than sort of plain text search. Because the index is, you know, I've got a concept, I've got the subcategories of that concept. I can really find easily the thing that I'm really looking for by looking at, you know, I think the NKS book index was well constructed by, you know, 20 years ago when I did that. You know, it really is a very efficient way to find information, and it really isn't feasible to find a lot of that information by doing sort of plain text search. It will be either inefficient or really inaccessible because, for example, the words are different, the concepts don't map very well, and so on. But anyway, for my metamathematics book, it's kind of like, well, we got to the last stage and it's got to have an index. And, you know, so I sat down for basically 2 days and I wrote its index. And, you know, it was not in some ways the most exciting thing I've ever done. But it's something which, in order to sort of add that value, in order to kind of tie that project with a bow, it's something that has to be done. Now, could I have delegated that? Sure, I have lots of people to delegate things to. I'm not sure who would have been able to do that index at a reasonable speed to good quality, because it kind of required knowing what's in the book. It required kind of knowing a bunch of the sort of history of the field to know about similar terms. And I felt it was better for me just to burn the time and do it. And I know I'm going to use that index myself in the future. So I'm kind of giving myself a gift to the future by having that exist. But yes, it was something where, you know, I value, I probably took altogether a couple of days of my time. I value that time pretty highly. And but it's something where it's just seemed better just to do it myself than to have it either done badly or take a really long time, whatever else. You know, in fact, I noticed even right after this session we're doing right now, next on my calendar for today is another book-related thing. I wrote a book 6-7 years ago now called An Elementary Introduction to the Wolfram Language. I recommend it to people. It's kind of a path into kind of computational language and sort of computational thinking about things. I think it's actually, it's a book that came out really well. I wrote it very quickly, you know, very much of things that I've really thought about a lot. And so it was really written kind of in a few weeks at output speed. And that was 6-7 years ago. Well, now, as the world has moved on, as our products are more capable, it's time for the 3rd edition of that book. And that's a super painful thing, because one of the things about making subsequent editions of books is it's very easy to make the book worse. And, you know, what ends up happening is you say, well, you know, now I want to add this piece about this. Now I want to add this piece about this. And you end up growing these sort of, you know, these kind of encrusted pieces on what was otherwise a, you know, nice, clean, breezy discussion about something or another. You say, I've really got to add this little piece. I've really got to add this little piece. And pretty soon the whole discussion kind of becomes really complicated and long, and people are like falling asleep reading it, and it's bad. And you think, oh, I'm making it better because I'm adding stuff to it. So you have to kind of resist that. And particularly when you get other people to help you with it, and you say, well, what should I add? You know, I did that, in fact, with this 3rd edition. I got a huge number of things. Why don't you add this? Why don't you add this? Why don't you add this? Well, you know, I know that adding most of those things would kill it, would make it much less readable than it is right now. So this is an example of something that's a particularly painful activity, but it's like, well, what do I do about it? Do I not do it and not make a 3rd edition of the book? It's a possibility. But there are things that are, advantageous to talk about in a third edition because they're things that are new in our language. They're things that people understand in the world at large. There are things that had to be taken out because there were things about, oh, you can access, your friend network in your social network or whatever. And, the companies that provide, the social media companies have all shut down those APIs, probably for good reasons. And in fact, we even suggested to some of them that they shut down certain things that we knew you could access by doing some things that seemed like they were bad ideas. But in any case, so it doesn't make sense to have that be in a section of the book. It should be taken out. Actually, it's really frustrating that some of the things in the book, that there's a lot of stuff with real world data in the book. And needless to say, things have changed. Like, we had, I had a little example of importing data from the front page of the United Nations website. Well, guess what? The front page of the United Nations website has changed. And it even now has some bizarre thing that blocks non-browser user agents and so on. So, so things have to be changed there. And, it's kind of like in five years or so, it's not too surprising that things that relate to real world data will change. And even some sensitivities about real world data have changed. And so, the things that were reasonable examples, but, they pull back in something that's kind of like, got more horrifying over time. Not our issue, because it's kind of something from the outside world that, we're pulling in some data from, a page of Wikipedia text or something, but it started talking about all kinds of crazy stuff. So, there are things that have to be changed there. But this is an example of something which is I admit that I've protested pretty badly in the meetings that we've had with the very good team that's been sort of putting together what needs to be done for this book. But that's an example of where, you might think, oh, you can just delegate all of that stuff, but I really can't. It's just going to make what I've put effort into get worse if it's all delegated. And so it's really a question of, well, I've really got to just do it myself, even though it's not the most exciting thing and the thing that I most want to do. So I think my basic answer is, okay, about delegation of things in general, it's kind of like it's a complicated trade-off, because sometimes you can delegate and it will be better than what you could do. Great, be happy. Often when you delegate things, at least with some probability, it's going to be worse than what you could do. Then you have to decide, is it worth the trade-off? Is it worth saving you the time versus having you spend more time and then do it to your quality as opposed to the quality of how it's delegated. And of course, it's complicated because when you delegate something, you don't actually know what the outcome will be. And you have much less control over the outcome than if you do it yourself. If you do it yourself and you run into trouble, then you always have kind of only yourself to blame, and you can make the decision on the ground, oh, I ran into trouble, I better go in a different direction. Whereas if you've delegated it, it's off with somebody else, and it's only, you have to manage it very well to have that person come back to you and say, whoops, this turned out to be more complicated than you or I thought. What am I going to do about this? Because what will normally happen is the person will say, I was told to do this, let me go do it. And often when you do the delegation, if you knew what the pitfalls were, what the speed bumps were going to be, you might mention it, but often you don't know those things. You wouldn't know them unless you're actually doing it yourself. And so you don't say, oh, by the way, if you run into this, come back and tell me about it, and we'll rethink what the strategy is. You just say, go do this, and then the person will try, diligently to do it, and maybe it turned out to be really hard, and maybe what you imagined was going to be, a 1-month project, it's like, oh my gosh, it's turned into a 6-month project, etc. I know for us, we try hard to make it be the case that when we initiate a project, that the initiator of the project gives some commentary about how hard they think it's going to be, and that our project management system kind of bounces it back if it turns out it's a lot harder than was expected. So I think my basic point is, in a first approximation, when you start a company, so to speak, build something, sort of the CEO has to do everything. And once you understand more about how all the different pieces work and you've grown to a certain scale, then you start hiring people to do those pieces that you think you can readily define what those pieces are. So another thing that goes wrong in delegation is you just say to somebody, just do the right thing, just do it, and you haven't really thought through. You don't have a roadmap for what should be done and what's going to come out. Just say, just go do it and do the right thing. Okay, sometimes the person you delegate to is sufficiently amazing and brilliant, and much more so than you are in that particular area, and they'll just take that, just do the right thing, and they'll do something amazing that wasn't what you expected. But much of the time in a situation where you're delegating like that, the person will get lost and they'll spin around and they'll be confused and they'll not know what to do. And it's kind of like it's an unfair thing. If you're the one managing them and you don't really know how it's supposed to work, and then you say, well, just go do it and go do it right. And then they can't. That's kind of like not very good management to do that. You really have to have conceptualized, how is this process going to work? And then, I can imagine what the steps would be. And now if the person gets a certain distance and they come back and say, hey, I'm confused, you can tell them, okay, take this next step, because you already had an idea what those would be. So, I've seen this plenty of times where people just get frustrated because they delegate stuff, and people they delegate to, they say, oh, the person didn't produce. And it's like, that's, it's not surprising. And one of the mistakes there is delegating to people who just are too junior, don't know enough, don't have enough experience, and giving them a task that involves a lot of judgment calls that they really can't make. One time out of many, you'll have discovered the person who's just absolutely amazing and who is about to, in a well-managed company, kind of jump ahead to be a really senior person very quickly. Because they're just really, really, talented and good and know what to do, sort of intrinsically know what to do. But the much more common case is that, when you delegate too juniorly, so to speak, it's bad for everybody. The project spins around, the person who delegated it doesn't get what they wanted, the person it was delegated to gets very stressed trying to figure out what to do, and they don't really know, and they go and do a bunch of work that has to get thrown away, and it's just all a bad idea. So it's really worthwhile to have the roadmap clearly laid out. Another thing that's the case, I think, is when there is a function where you just say, that's so boring, I don't care about any of that, I just want that done somehow. Okay, that's the stuff that won't be done very well. And I think it isn't done well for several reasons, and I've certainly experienced this myself. One is, if the CEO doesn't care, then people notice that the CEO doesn't care. It's rather demotivating. And it's demotivating. It's sort of an excuse to kind of not really stay on task as well as you might, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, in some cases, it's like, you don't care, and so you don't really know what should be being done there. You don't have an assessment. Was it done well? Was it done badly? You don't know how to give good feedback, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, it is usually a sign of trouble when there is an area where you say, I just don't care about that, just go do it. I have to say, sometimes, like, for example, for us, an area that that had happened with us was in kind of transaction processing infrastructure at our company, where it's like, it's just not something I've really, we're a company that is a commercial organization that is in the, has to make money in order to exist. And so clearly transaction processing is something you need to do, but I never thought of it as being something that I should care about, or, I always thought of it as something that was kind of dull. Well, for years, decades, we had sort of, these rather duct taped together transaction processing things, these expensive outside ERP systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, big complicated stuff. About 5 years ago, I kind of got fed up because it became clear that the systems we had were just too rickety, too bad, and things would happen like, oh, we want to have a new product. Oh, it's going to take us a month to reconfigure our transaction processing system to be able to deal with this new product. That's just crazy. That's not a part of the picture that should be complicated like that. So we made the decision, we're just going to build our own transaction processing system using Wolfram language, a nice, clean, modern, sort of symbolic approach to ERP systems and transaction processing and so on. And now we've almost finished that. Many parts of it are now live, and it's great. And it's a part, and now it's something that I kind of understand. I think it's cool. I care about it. It's a good example of kind of a way of representing the world computationally. In this case, it's representing, products and transactions and customers and so on computationally. It's something that kind of is now, internalized into at least my way of thinking about things. And it's something which we are being very successful with. We'll probably spin off a company that just does that particular thing, because it's not really core to our main business, but it's a very powerful and good thing. And it's something where for a long time we hadn't done that very well. And I blame myself for the fact we hadn't done that very well, because I just didn't care about that stuff and I didn't understand it. And I don't think we managed the team particularly well in that area and so on. So anyway, I think the basic point is stuff you care about and stuff you understand yourself. If you are the leader, it's going to go a lot better than the stuff where you don't. And it's a bad sign when you say, this stuff is too boring. We really, really need it, but it's for the objective that I want to achieve, but it's too boring to actually do. So I'm going to just delegate it to other people. It usually ends badly. I have to say about that part of what one's doing here is, what are you signing up to deliver? That is, if you say, well, I like doing some kind of research or something, and but I need to make a living, so I have to turn this into a company, and but I really hate the corporate, the commercial aspects of what's going on, the corporate aspects of what's going on. Maybe you need to rethink how you do that research. Maybe you need to be a professor or something where you're going to have a different set of where I don't know whether I think being a professor, you have to do lots of marketing work too, but where that is a sign up for the thing that actually is optimized for what you actually want to do, rather than signing up for something where you say, well, I'm going to do this thing because there's this one piece that I like, but there's this giant cloud of other stuff that I really hate and that I don't understand very well, that's necessary in order to do the piece that I want. If you're lucky, there's a sort of refactoring, reformulation of how to set things up that makes it so that you don't have to kind of, build through that whole tower of things that you actually don't want really to do. Let's see. Okay, so there's a question here from Schrodinger, apparently. Would the academic environment be a place where a researcher and inventor could pursue their own research, or at least make at least some profit from developing patents and designs? They say, I'm in the US and just about to start a master's, and I'm considering starting a PhD in materials science. Oh boy, that's a complicated question. And let me take a drink of water before I try and answer it. Well, first thing to say is, you want to do research, you want to pursue something you think is interesting, and if that's sort of objective number one, then you have to think about what are the sub-objectives. Another objective might be you want to get rich. Another objective might be you want to make the money that you need in order to pursue the research more aggressively that you think should be pursued, perhaps outside of the domain where other people are giving you the money and you have to convince them first that it's going to be a successful thing. So I think, one has to sort of break these objectives apart to understand how it works. I will say, in terms of, okay, so I'll tell a story about my own life, I suppose, this is now 1981. I had developed precursor to Wolfram language, a thing called SMP. I was a faculty member at Caltech at the time, and I kind of knew that this software system, big software system, it was going to be useful to other people in addition to me. I had kind of developed it sort of for myself because I wanted to have it, but I also perfectly well knew I was building a piece of technology that would have broader use. But I also recognized that if my only objective was to use it myself, it was still of very high value to have it be widely used in the world. I mean, for example, I use Wolfram language every day to do all sorts of things that I want to do. But the fact that I have a thing of the quality level and depth that Wolfram language is, it simply would be absolutely absurdly impossible to build that as a single user thing. It's something which is the way it is because millions of other people use it, and there's a whole sort of commercial economic ecosystem around it that makes it feasible for all these things to be built, so that I can kind of cherry pick the things that I actually want to use every day as I use it. So in other words, if I were doing it as I'm an academic and I'm just going to build the thing that I need to use, the one tool that I need to use, I'm going to build this tower just for me, it's clearly not as realistic to do that. And the outcome is not going to be as good as if you broaden it out and you say, this is an actual product and lots of people can use it, and it has a whole big ecosystem around it and so on. So back in 1981, that's what I realized for SMP. And I was kind of pursuing, okay, so how do I do this? And it's a long, painful story, which I think I've told in some other places about my efforts to sort of do that through Caltech. That was a horrible disaster. And then shall I do it myself? Then I start a company to do it. And then through, this is it's quite an interesting story, where some pieces of it I've only learnt in, like decades later, some of the little side stories about what actually happened. But suffice it to say, the university, or at least some parts of the university, kind of freaked out about the idea that there was this sort of valuable intellectual property that was sort of somehow entangled with the university, but also there was this company getting started, and it all kind of mapped into some other things that had happened about gene sequencing, also from Caltech, and also with the person who was then the chairman of the board of trustees. It was a big, messy situation. It's a bit of a long story, which I don't need to tell right now. But although actually interesting story in terms of the dynamics of organizations and people and so on. But in any case, the end result of that was that I quit the university and did the company. I went to work at the Institute for Advanced Study, actually in Princeton, which had the interesting feature that as the then chairman of its board of trustees said, we gave away the computer when von Neumann developed a computer at the Institute. How can we ever sort of make any claims on intellectual property going forward? And so, I got them to write a letter that basically says they're hiring me to do basic research. And if I have a hobby of doing sort of technology development, that's kind of my own thing. By the way, at the time, this is now 1983, I guess, I was briefly kind of probably the world expert on the policies of different universities about the ownership of intellectual property developed by faculty members and so on. And that was at the time, and I don't know what's really happened since, at the time there was great diversity in those policies. There were a small number of universities where there had been pretty successful kind of faculty developed things, and then the university has some cut and it goes forward and everybody's happy and people make money and the university makes money and so on and so on and so on. There was a lot of confusion. And I have to say, I had many, as I was figuring out where to go next, I had many meetings with university administrations and legal teams and things like this about their policies. And there was some pretty funky, crazy things that I could tell you about, but that sort of surfaced there. But the end result was sort of, I don't really know where that's landed today in terms of what universities claim they own, what kind of entanglements they provide for faculty members and so on. I think as a practical matter, what I've seen work is the university doesn't get very grabby. The people who maybe were faculty members there, maybe they go off and they start the company, and then years go by and the company does well. Perhaps not that many companies will do well, but the ones that do well do well. And then those faculty members become big donors to the university or have at least good relationships with the university, and that's all good. The other, sort of door number two is the university says, no, 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 we own it, we're gonna control it, and we're going to put in place our, technology transfer office that's going to decide what happens with this, and almost all of those efforts fail. In almost all of those cases, the thing just goes splat. And part of the reason for that is that the person who invents something is usually the person who has the vision, the drive, the motivation to see something happen with it. The professional technology transfer person says, well, I'm going to try and put it in this box. Sometimes it will fit in this box. Sometimes it's a well enough defined, oh, we have some particular new thing that, new kind of pharmaceutical thing that fits in this pattern, that works this way, and we kind of know how to send it down the pipeline. And then that kind of approach can work. But when it's something that's really different from what's been seen before, it's very unlikely to work. I mean, it's hard enough for one person to have a successful vision for how something new can work. It becomes less and less feasible when it's kind of, oh, well, there's one person who had the vision, and then it gets transferred to the official technology transfer person who's going to do this and that. And it usually, in my observation, doesn't end well. Now, I am totally out of date on the policies of different universities about intellectual property ownership. So I don't know. You can, read the handbook or whatever to find out what it says. I don't know. I think that I think in general, there has been more of if people are going to go off and do something commercially with things, let them go off and do it. That tends to be, as I said, that tends to be the thing that ends better, but it doesn't mean to say that every university administration has decided that's how it should set things up. And, there are counter arguments. There are all kinds of crazy things that can happen of people basically saying, well, I'm doing this company, but I'm kind of running it out of my university lab. And I've got all these kind of, people who are supposed to be graduate students, and they're really just working for the company, and it all gets very messy. And and then it's like what you thought of as the sort of the open academic story, not that it often is, but becomes it's NDAs all the way down the line, and everybody gets unhappy about it. So I think details matter, and I don't know those details, and it depends on universities and so on. But I think in terms of person asking this question talked about doing material science and profiting from patents and designs and so on. I mean, patents are a pretty, complicated bet. They're expensive to get. They're expensive to maintain. They are, it's very cut and dried. Somebody is owning it. It's assigned to somebody. Somebody has to pay for it to be got. All those kinds of things. And then actually having the patent really be worth something and be licensed is a whole separate issue. And sometimes the real value isn't in the thing that was officially written in the claims of the patent. It was in know-how that one had and things like this, and not well captured in the patent. It's complicated. And I think that's kind of asking for trouble to really focus on that aspect of whatever one's creating. Now, in terms of is the academic environment good or not for pursuing research and so on? I mean, it really depends on you, and it depends on what kinds of things you want to research, and it depends on the situation in that field of study. There are places where, let's say you want to do some kind of computer software-y type thing. Well, there are universities that do that stuff, but the motivation structure there is we're going to do it so we can write papers about it. That may not be your motivation structure. Your motivation structure may be, I want to do it so as many people as possible will use it. That's really a different problem from the problem of what happens at, typical motivation structures at universities, which are really, if you're in the sort of faculty, sequence, so to speak, it's kind of like, I don't even know whether you get credit, so to speak, in the getting tenure and things like this. If lots of people use something you've built, I'm not sure you get anything for that. I think maybe you only get, oh, did academics cite your paper? That it's a value system that has developed in a particular way. And the question is the thing that you want to do and that you really value the thing that is well aligned with the value system that exists in kind of that part of the academic world? And I think the thing to realize about academia is, particularly in big, well-developed fields, things have become quite procedural. That is, if you say, is somebody really thinking and, big picture thinking, or are they just following this track and doing the next experiment, figuring out the next computation and so on? Most of the time, they're just following a track. When it's big, when it's a big field that's well institutionalized, it's kind of, there is a track, you can make progress, you will make, with low risk, high certainty, you will make incremental progress by following this track. If you go off the track and you start doing wild things, much higher risk, the rewards are much higher, but the system is not well set up to deal with that. The system is well set up to deal with low risk, kind of well-tracked, fairly certain progress kinds of things. And that's what a lot of academia is. You will find small pockets of academia, particularly in young fields or in places where, for some reason of luck or skill, some particular organization has been set up, or some particular department of some university or even group within a department has been set up to be sort of a little bubble of innovation and so on, where you can be much more successful. But the main flow is pretty procedural. And in that procedural flow, it's like, well, you got to make a grant application, it's far in advance, and you don't really know what you're going to be working on then, but you've got to say, well, something that you could be working on, and maybe that's the thing you already worked on. You're writing papers, you've got to do the whole thing of doing all the social engineering of making sure that your paper will be accepted by the people who review it, and the peers, and the this and that and the other. It's very it's a complicated thing, and it's a very different set of skills and interests that are needed from, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and I'm going to start some company and I'm going to sort of do my own thing and push as hard as I can and make all my own mistakes and decisions. Or then in sort of a different case is, I'm going to do that and I'm going to get venture capital, and the venture capitalists are going to tell me what to do, and they tell you what to do in a very different way than like a funding agency might constrain what you do. It's a different sort of thing you're signing up for, but in that case, another type of constraint. So I think I don't have a great general answer to this. I think that it depends very much on the details of what you're doing and whether you can find a way. For example, you could say, look, I'm inventing these great new materials that are going to do some amazing thing, but the payoff is going to be 25 years in the future. That's too long for most kinds of commercial operations. Or you say, I've got this incremental thing that is deliverable now. Now, sometimes the incremental thing that's deliverable may not be terribly exciting to you. It may be, I'm going to do this amazing sort of research, but and that's what I really care about. But I could also make nonstick frying pans with it or something, and that's a thing that I could deliver immediately. But oh my gosh, do I really want to spend my time doing that? And the thing to realize is, whenever you say the idea that you're just going to invent something and then it's going to magically become something that's highly profitable in the world, I suppose that might happen to some people. I think that's the deeply minority case, so to speak. I think that the majority case is absolutely that, you might invent something, but there's a huge amount of heavy lifting to be done to actually make that thing sort of fit that thing into the world and set it up so that it can actually prosper and be potentially commercially successful and so on. Let's see. Well, I think I need to, I unfortunately need to go to the other meeting that I said I needed to do soon, and I'm going to procrastinate a small amount so I can answer maybe a couple more questions or comments here. Let's see. It's a question from Ring here. How do you think applicant tracking systems will evolve as candidates increasingly try to trick them by using keywords in their resumes? It's like the AIs take over in a rather coarse way. I mean, it's like when there was this thing, I don't know whether it really ever took off, of having sort of AI grading of essays that people would write for standardized tests and things like this. It's like the essay you write that is, well fed to an AI is different from the essay you write that's ever intended for a human to read. And I don't doubt that there's a way of writing a resume that is sort of incredibly AI friendly, and for a simple AI that's doing word spotting or something. Yes, there's no doubt a way to make it a pure word soup. You just have a pile of keywords or something, and you hope no human ever looks at it. I will tell you that I don't do as much of this as I have in the past, but reading, cover letters, resumes, things like that. I will say that that the people, first point is, in a sense, when you're looking for a job with a company, the real question is, genuinely, is there a fit between what you want to do, what you're able to do, and how the company works and what the company wants to do? And so you may be a great person, in quotes, but the company may be also a great company, but there just isn't a fit. You can be a person who likes to be told very definitely, do this, do this, do this, continue the way you were doing things in school, and you get an A and this, that, and the other. And there may be some great big company that is well tracked, is well organized, so that you can prosper in that fashion. If you take that same person who expects to be, assigned homework every day and sort of put on a track, and they'll perform really well on that track, you take them into a more entrepreneurial company that has less well-defined things, they'll flail around and not do well. And vice versa. You might find somebody who is really good at just figuring out what to do for themselves. You put them in a big company and they're like, really, I have to do this? That's an incredibly stupid way to do things. But people will say, but that's how we do it. That's what you have to do in this company. So, there is this question of fit, of whether the way that you are and the way you want to be is the way that the culture and operations of a company actually are. So then the question is, how can you tell that? When you send an application to that company or whatever, and the goal of the HR department or recruiting department or whatever is to figure out, is this person going to be a fit for the thing that we're looking for? And so, there's a question of sort of how do you signal that? And, part of signaling it is being yourself, so to speak, in writing something like the cover letter, the resume, and so on. Now what you'll find is some people will really focus on, who, what, when, where. I got this degree, got this GPA, I did this, I did that, fact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the cover letter will start off, I'm applying for such and such a job, and my degree in blah, blah, blah will make me well qualified to do this job. Okay. Now, for some companies, that may be an absolutely winning thing to do. For a company like ours, that's much more sort of thinking all the way down, so to speak, that's like a real negative. That's like, really, I don't know whether your degree got from University X, qualifies you to do that. Who's to know? They may be teaching irrelevant stuff that we don't care about there. You may have just been able to do homeworks and never have to do anything that was sort of off the track that was defined. And that's just not the way our company works. So, for us, the resume, the cover letter that starts, I can use my degree in X to be successful in your job Y, is likely to be, is not likely to go well. For us, for example, things that, it varies with the company, but I would say the main point is know the company and get some fix on the culture of the company to know, kind of how you want to position, how you're presenting yourself. And by the way, if you don't fit, find another company to apply to, because it's just not going to work. Maybe you go there and you'll just be unhappy. That's the challenge, is to be able to understand companies and so on well enough to know this is going to be a cultural fit, this is not going to be a fit, and so on. And by culture, I mean sort of corporate culture and kind of the way that, whether things are very managed, whether they're very think for yourself, whether it's very political internally, whether it's very, please your boss and that will all be good, whether it's very much, if you do something good that was off the track, then people will think that's great. If you do something that's good but off the track, people would say it's off the track, that's really bad. Varies with company. Those things are very different in different companies. And there are companies where there is where people are continually being sort of, can you do more? Can you do more? Can you take on more responsibility? and where some people will say, oh my gosh, I don't want to take on more responsibility. I'm already as stressed as I could be. And other people are like, great, give me more. And that again varies with different companies. So I think knowing that and being able to sort of write a cover letter that speaks to that represents yourself, because what you're trying to figure out is there a match here? Because you really don't want, oh yeah, I managed to get a job, but I hate the job. That doesn't really do anybody any good. I mean, if you're in the situation, it's this job or no job, then fine, then that may be, that may be a situation that you have to get into. But if it's certainly in today's labor market, it's probably the case that there's some there's some choice there. There may be constraints that make somebody not have a choice, and then, well, then it's, you got to kind of, it's like I was saying with products and so on, you kind of got to roll up your sleeves and do what you have to do. And if you're lucky, the thing that you initially thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible, I'm going to hate this, you're going to find that silver lining that really makes it great. By once you dig into it, but you can't be sure of that. But I think in the question of kind of the typical thing is know the company well enough that you can sort of talk to it the way that it will find useful. But sometimes people make the mistake of writing things where they think they've understood the company by reading I don't know, they read a Wikipedia page, they read one of these crazy extortion play employment assessment kinds of systems that where they'll disgruntled ex-employees of company X will be writing terrible things about the company, and then the site they'll be writing it on will be sending emails to the management of the company saying, you can, by paying this amount of money, we can help you manage your reviews on this site, which is just about as bizarre a kind of extortion protection racket as I think you'll commonly see. But in any case, you could, if let's say you take information from one of these places and you deduce what you think the company is like based on that, and then you say, I understand the company, I'm going to write them saying, I think that you're going to basically lecture them about their company. That doesn't usually go over very well. At least I don't think it does, because it's usually like, really, that's what they concluded our company is about? Then they just got it wrong. Now, I have to say, and I haven't been the one reading front lines, reading like cover letters and things for a long, long time. But I do remember from the distant past, I remember one person, a cover letter I happened to read that began, I've been using your product for many years, and I've reported so many bugs over the years, I figure I should come and actually work for the company and help solve some of these bugs. Actually, that person we ended up hiring into marketing and did really well there. But that was an example of something which was a kind of, it had some life to it, and it kind of made a point that the person's been a serious user of our product, and it's kind of it's an interesting, nice sort of take on what needs to be done. But I think sometimes I have to say, in the history of our company, I'm thinking of a few incidents where people who are really very talented ended up writing these letters that ended up in the HR department that were kind of humorous in a way, but they were sufficiently wild that our HR department was like, really? Are we really going to hire this person? This person sounds just crazy. But when I looked at these letters, it's like, hey, that's kind of funny. There were often people where we had some awareness they'd been somehow interacted with us in some way, and they wrote some letter that was not the straight shot kind of thing, but had kind of dry, snarky humor in it and things like this, and that fell very flat on the HR department and required that it reach somebody for whom they would actually understand that. and knew some of the context. And so, that's probably not a good idea. It's kind of, it goes along the lines of, if you're writing software documentation, for example, should you put jokes into software documentation? The answer is no, because, the one person's joke is another person's confusion. And, and also in that particular case, it's like, once you've if you read the documentation multiple times, you see the same joke and you groan by the third time you see it. And also by the time you're reading the documentation, you're probably trying to solve some problem. And it's not obvious that you want to see this joke, because you're actually pretty serious about wanting to solve a problem. But in any case, that's a sort of a side feature there. So in any case, I think the thing that is, I do feel, another thing to say about resumes, cover letters, things like that. Okay, about resumes. There's a minimalist resume that doesn't really tell you, if you're reading it, much about the person other than like, I did this job for 2 years, I did this, I did that, and it doesn't really tell you what the person did. Then there's the version where there's a big purple passage about, I did this and that and the other thing. And, I think, I don't know quite what to suggest here, other than that it's really good when there's something concrete you can point to. I worked on this, I did that, I produced this, and so on. I'm not sure how much time people spend actually looking at the work product. And sometimes if the work product is kind of a little bit off track, it's like, look, I wrote this amazing thing in Haskell, and the person is somebody who can't read a line of Haskell code. It doesn't really do you much good. But I kind of think, sometimes I'll read these things and it's like, I know this is puffed. And it's like, it just doesn't do anybody any good to have this very puffed thing there that's, where the person is they say they were an intern somewhere and they say, define a multi-billion-dollar product as an intern at whatever. And it's like, really, not plausible. And so I think that's finding a way to explain stuff so that there is some clarity of explanation, and it isn't just, I did this job and there's no explanation of what it was, versus, sort of puffing it up and so on, is sometimes perhaps challenging. But I don't know. Again, maybe I shouldn't say more about this, because honestly I'm a little bit out of the loop here, because I don't read very many of these sort of primary resumes at this point. I used to, but I think the world has changed, and maybe the expectations of what's in these resumes has changed somewhat over time. Let's see. Well, I probably should wrap up here. I will say that tomorrow I'm doing a general Q&A, AMA, about our various science initiatives, Wolfram Physics Project, Metamathematics Project, the Ruliad, all those kinds of good things. And things which are heading for being pursued further at our Wolfram Institute that will be launching very soon. Anyway, I'll be doing that tomorrow afternoon, kind of a general Q&A about all things related to our science initiatives and the content of our science initiatives. I would say that these sessions, I am more talking about meta content, about sort of the way things get done, not what's being done, so to speak. Tomorrow I will be doing very much a discussion about what's being done and what we're managing to figure out there. And well, I look forward to that, and hope to see some of you there. And I will be, I see a lot of interesting questions and comments here, which I'd love to address. And I guess I'll have a chance to do that in about 2 weeks. So, well, thanks very much, and bye for now.